structures at work, and we're going to talk about a couple of different frameworks as we go through that. Oops. So the first thing is that I want to cover is, do incentive structures actually work? Because there's a huge case to say that they don't. What's a hygiene factor? What's a motivator? Some cultural issues to actually address as well before we even design incentive structures. And then we'll just talk a little bit about some of the incentive structures I've seen and how well they work, etc. So there's a fairly good case to say that incentive structures don't actually work. The argument is that there's been many studies to suggest that the carrot and stick approach, whereby either there is a reward or retribution, is no longer valid for today's businesses, where right-brained outcomes are valued, because much of the process work has been either taken over by technology or outsourced. So you can actually look online and you can see that there's many studies that have been done that actually support this, to say that where incentive structures have been put in place, people actually tend to do worse where they need to come up with something that's a little bit outside the box thinking. So, but when you look at our business though, technological advances haven't been enough that all of our processes are automated, and outsourcing is only a relatively new concept. So for our business, the old thinking can actually still work. But I guess my question to you is it the right approach? For many reasons, it's probably not, in that it's not the only approach and that should be considered. So what should we think about when designing incentive structures? The first thing that we've got to get right is this idea of our team culture. So Carolyn Taylor from Walking the Talk, she makes the argument that if you've got the right culture in your team and you actually understand your culture, that the way that you employ people, fire people, hire people, everything that you do, your incentive structures, everything around it will be toward that team culture, which would mean that you'd actually get your desired outcomes because the people would be the right sort of people on the bus. So she basically says that there's these 6 archetypes of culture. So the first one is an achievement-based. So those people are performance, accountability, focus, speed, meritocracy, which just means that you're actually being promoted or awarded on merit, delivery, discipline, transparency, and rigor. A lot of achievement people are actually, or achievement cultures are actually sort of around sales cultures. So an achievement culture would actually work really well with your BDMs, and you can have a couple of different cultures working in your business. You possibly won't, it's unlikely that you would be able to have all 6 working in your business, but over a long stretch of time you could actually work to incorporate all of them. But achievement is really about the salespeople, and what you might find is that achievement also works with your BDMs. So what you're looking for is incentive models that support individual achievements, both adhering to performance outcomes and company policy. As I said, it's based on meritocracy. The one team culture, it supports collaboration, the globalization, internal customer and teamwork, and it's all about without boundaries. So the one team incentive structure would be designed to support the success of others and whole team goals. If you had a one team culture, but you were you'd actually designed your incentive structures to support the individuals, you'd have a lot of problems. So then it's about your innovative culture. So the innovative culture is they're entrepreneurial, it's agile, there's creativity, you're challenging the status quo. It's that whole point of view of if it ain't broke, I'm still going to break it to see what else I can find out. It's about learning and continuous improvement. So for those sorts of cultures, you would need to design an incentive structure that rewards excellence. And it's okay to make mistakes. And in fact, making mistakes and learning from that might actually be something that you would reward as well. Your customer-centric businesses are those that they have an external focus, and everything that you do is actually about the customer. We talk about this, we've talked about this a couple of times in terms of when we looked at the KPIs last week for the balanced scorecard. We talked about that was a customer-centric business. There's an external focus. Everything is about the service, the responsiveness to the customers, reliability, and listening. So your customer-centric model would have incentive models that support customer satisfaction, for example. So it might all be about the NPS score. Your people first culture are those that you're empowering your people, there's delegation, there's development, safety, care, respect. balance, diversity, relationships, and fun. It is all about your team, and your team, it's not about your team being your asset. It's actually much deeper than that. You actually truly care about your team and the development of your team. So your people first incentives would be designed to develop the employees' skills, knowledge, what it is that they want in their life. It'd be all about sort of incentivizing them. And then you have what's called the greater good. So that's all about social responsibility, the environment, sustainability, citizenship, meaning, community, and making a difference. Those in this culture are willing to make sacrifices for what they believe is the greater good of the cause. And so those incentives would not be aligned to remuneration, for example. It would be aligned to things like actually supporting the greater cause and the outcomes that the greater cause had. Okay. So before we get into, there's another couple of things that we have to think about, and this is, Ben did a really great job when we had our conference, and he talked about the hygiene versus motivating factors. So Herzberg actually in the 1950s and 60s went out and he did some surveying of people, basically, normal everyday people in their jobs, and he talked to two different groups of people that were happy in their jobs, and he said, okay, tell me all of the things why the reasons you are happy in your job, and then people that are unhappy in their job. And exactly the same thing. And there's all of these consistent characteristics related to job satisfaction and job dissatisfaction. So in job satisfaction, the motivators are achievement, recognition, the work itself, which is a huge one. And if you can get that right in terms of culture, if you can employ property managers that just love property management and want to do the right thing by you and your business and your customer, we know that there's no incentives that will motivate that person better than the fact that it comes from within themselves. And I'll talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation in a second. The responsibility, there's advancement, and there's growth. On the other side, the job dissatisfaction, the things that kept coming out were company policies and bureaucracy, supervision, relationships certainly with the supervisor and peers. That's an incredibly strong one. If the person isn't happy with their supervisor or peers, no motivators are going to actually help them. The work conditions, salary is a hygiene factor, status, and security. So what he found is that the opposite to job satisfaction is not job dissatisfaction, and the opposite to job dissatisfaction is not job satisfaction. In fact, the opposite of satisfaction is no satisfaction at all, and the opposite of dissatisfaction is no dissatisfaction. So what we mean by that is that if the hygiene factors aren't actually right, then putting in a motivator is not actually going to help the person. So, for example, giving someone recognition and reward will not fix the issue, that actually there's a deeper issue in that they're dissatisfied with how they're being managed. So deep cultural issues must be addressed and fixed for any motivators to work. So when we're talking about motivation, and when you're sort of designing what works for people and what doesn't work, the other thing to think about is this whole idea of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And that's based on, intrinsic motivation is based on, it comes from within. I'll never forget, I was at a conference and Wayne Bennett was speaking, and he said, the whole audience was absolutely quiet. You could have heard a pin drop. He's an amazing speaker, and if you ever get to see him, please do. But he basically said very simply that I could never have given motivating. People ask me all the time, well, how do I motivate someone like Darren Lockyer? And for those of you not in football, I'm really sorry, but this is just something that, and he said to me, Darren Lockyer was never going to be motivated because I said to him, oh, you need to do this for whatever reason. He got up every day and he did all of the things that other people wouldn't do because he has this deep within him. He needed to do the things that he wanted to do for himself. It actually wasn't about anybody else. Champions can't be motivated to be champions. It's actually from within themselves. And this is something that, the more that we can understand this, the better that we'll hire the right people in the first place. So intrinsic people care about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And extrinsic motivation is things like the carrot and the stick. That's, you might sort of give salary or bonuses or extra commission or gift cards or whatever it might be. And then, or you might tighten things like this. The stick is schedule, like tighten their scheduled deadlines, for example, or put them into a performance review system. So things like that. So actually taking things away, decreasing their bonuses and commissions for non-performance. So it's really, while in extrinsic motivators, there is an argument to say that they don't actually work. In our line of work, where, as I said at the start, where there's task-based performance and it hasn't all just been automated and outsourced, and there's still simple rules to follow, you can say that those extrinsic motivators can work. But it's really important to understand that they're not going to work if the hygiene factors aren't actually there in the first place. So that's the biggest thing that we need to sort of be thinking about. So when I talked about the culture you desire and supporting that culture, and as I said, this is Carolyn Taylor. Sorry, this has actually come up in the wrong area. I've actually talked about this, but there's the 6 archetypes, and that's something that you really need to think about. I'd really love you to actually go and read Carolyn Taylor's Walking the Talks if you're serious about implementing a culture-driven business with incentives that align to actually that culture. I didn't say that each have their own values, behaviors, symbols, and systems, but they do, and so that's really important. So I've actually, I believe I've gone through this. I think this has come up second time. I'm very sorry. So now what I want to talk about is actually, last week we talked about the balanced scorecard, and we went through an entire framework and we looked at what looks like this business, right? So we talked about the financial, customer, internal processes, and learning and growth. And this is a business that basically is all about the customer. So this would be a customer-centric business, and potentially because of the team actively, you can see down here under learning and growth, no buy-in at the moment, team are job-oriented and not career-oriented, risk are unknown, and he wants to move to a team buy-in, team actively building careers, career paths are provided in the agency which reduces recruitment costs, etc. You can see here that there's 2 cultures that are playing, and you can have a couple of different cultures. So the first one would be the one team, so everyone getting on the bus and working out, you know, basically working for the customer, and then the customer-centric approach. So if you're designing initiatives for this team, if you're designing actual incentive structures, we can see here that these are the measurements that we've already put in place. So we know that we want to increase the total revenue, increase the total profit, percentage of cost to revenue, etc. So there would be an incentive structure that actually supports that, potentially for the whole team goal. It wouldn't be that you're actually individually giving incentive structures. It would be that if we get to a certain amount of revenue, a certain amount of profit, percentage of cost to revenue, etc., then, and we increase our new managements within 5 kilometres, then everyone gets something, and it would be something that would be agreed upon between the whole team goal. But because the customer service part of this is so strong, and it's a customer-centric business, it would actually only happen, the past go would be that you actually had an NPS score over, say, a positive score over 20, because there's no point in getting the revenue up and the profit up and new managements within 5 kilometres, etc., if actually the customer satisfaction has gone down, because it means it's going to bleed out the other end. So this is where looking at a business and saying, how do I design incentive structures that actually truly go toward the culture of the business and the measurements and initiatives of the business. That's sort of how to look at that. I'm sorry for those of you that haven't been on every webinar and sort of taken the journey with us that wouldn't have seen this, but this is basically from when we developed the balanced scorecard and getting the KPIs and the initiatives down. We went through a whole process to get to this point, but you can see pretty clearly what's important to this business by the measurements area and the objectives area. So that's what I'm saying, where these 2 cultures are actually really important in terms of if we were designing incentive structures, the last thing I would want to do is put an achievement-based culture in where I'm recognising and rewarding people individually when it's actually all about the team. And the last thing I would do is put a financial incentive in place without actually recognising that what's really important to this business is the fact that the NPS score is a positive score over 20, for example. So that's sort of how I kind of wanted to show you the difference that measurements can actually mean. So the keys to successful incentive structures are: ensure it supports your why and what you stand for. And we talked about why and what you stand for in the webinar, I think, last week. Ensure your objectives are measured to implement KPIs to then implement incentives. So it's all about getting that why, developing your balance scorecard to actually work out all of the area of the businesses that you want to improve, where you're going to go, etc. Putting the KPIs to those, and then implement the incentives that actually match those to the culture of your business. Ensure you do think about the culture of your business. This measuring culture is actually not this airy-fairy, arty-farty thing. It's actually a tangible thing that you can measure within your business. And there truly is an argument to say, and everyone knows this, but it's so difficult to actually put into action, is that if you get the right people, you actually, then it's about rewarding people rather than trying to get people to do things with the carrot and stick approach. There is another argument to say that rewarding people for the things that people actually find that they just love doing actually cheapens it for them anyway, and then they start to see it as work rather than as something that they just love doing, and that's really important to think about as well. You really need to identify what is important to your employee. I'm not going to go into this too much, but there's a book called The 5 Languages of Love, and it talks about what different people value in terms of recognition and reward. And for example, some people value praise, other people value gifts, other people value money, and it's actually more about relationships, but it does work for employees as well. And I think it's really important that whatever you do, getting your employees on board with what the incentive structure is and actually going through that process and designing it with them in mind will be a huge factor, rather than just coming in and saying, well, this is what our objectives are, this is what our measurements are, and this is how we're going to reward you, without actually thinking about, well, hang on, who's in our team, what sort of culture do they represent? Because you possibly have a culture in your business without even thinking about it. And if you looked at those 6 archetypes, you could possibly put yourself in one of those. So therefore, you'd be able to design an incentive structure that does actually take that into account, because culture really is just about the people within the business and the way and the strategy in the business. So identify what is important to your employee, because you can, like in everything else, if you give the wrong type of reward or recognition, let's say you give a bottle of alcohol for someone that actually doesn't drink alcohol, it actually has a detrimental effect, rather than the person thinking, oh, it was nice that they tried. It's actually, you don't know me at all and you haven't taken the time to get to know me. So that's a really important part of this as well. So I just quickly wanted to say we do have numbers game training coming up on this Sydney 2nd of August, 3rd of August and 4th of August. And as part of people that sort of are our clients, you do get a 5% discount if you go on and book, and it's I Love Learning is the actual discount. So you just go to atmosphere.com, there's a professional development section, or you can just use this link here, and then you just put in the I Love Learning code and you can come along to those sessions if you want to. Remember, you can download any of the books, Connecting the Dots, Building Blocks and Numbers Game, and you can join the conversation at halo.com webinars, where we can talk more about incentive structures. It's a bit hard when I've only got 20 minutes, but I'll just jump back now and see if anyone's got any questions at all. Oh, there we go. So does anyone have any questions at all while I'm here? More than welcome to ask me anything. I guess one of the biggest things I want to say is that putting incentive structures around things like, your KPIs in terms of just the normal arrears and those sorts of things aren't likely to get you to where you want to go in terms of your strategy. So the overall big picture. And so if it's about the client, think about an incentive structure that thinks about the NPS score. It's those sorts of things that I guess I just don't want to give you, designing. You can definitely have an incentive structure for people that value it, that, if they do get their arrears down and their lease renewals down and all those sorts of things, that's very normal. A lot of people do it. But whether it actually works or not is sort of remains to be seen. I haven't seen that it works that well. More so it puts fear into people that, well, if I don't get it, I'm actually going to lose my job, which is not coming from an intrinsic motivator. So, yeah. So if there's no questions, then I will see you next week for the next webinar. Thanks very much, guys. Bye. Thanks very much, Michelle. That's great. I'm glad you got something out of that. Thank you. Okay, thanks, guys. Bye.